I want to invite each artist on our panel to give a maybe 2-sentence introduction of who they are, where they come from, and what they do. So we could start here.
Oh, okay. So I'm Brandon Wright. I come from Los Angeles, California, and as far as the art that I produce, I work with my twin brother Brian, who couldn't be here today. Newlywed, so he's got some other commitments. And also have a company called Cinestill Film, and we produce products made from motion picture photography stocks made by Kodak that make them accessible for still photographers.
I'm Raymond from Singapore. I'm a fine arts graduate. I do painting sometimes, but I chose the camera, the photographic medium itself, as my main tool or main medium. I don't really see them as separate mediums, like painting is painting, photography is photography. I'm just using light to do my painting.
My name is Season now, so it sounds a little bit strange, the name, but it's come from my Cantonese name. So actually I was born in Macau, and I'm based in Japan now, and I'm doing photography and as a contemporary art and medium. Actually, I combine with the philosophy of the Asian. So now because in the Asian we have the kind of the negative space, but it's actually this without negative meaning. And so I try to take the picture also from the snow, and everything was covered by snow. And I try to put as looks like the yin painting, and I want to bring the philosophy to the contemporary art. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
I'm Stephen Schaub, Eve Schaub's partner in our new endeavors of making work. I've lived in Vermont for 22 years as a working contemporary artist. I've done everything from master printing to consulting and teaching, and I'm very excited and very honored to have everybody here as part of the show.
I'm Carol Aghori. I started as a journalist when there was only film, and the freelance photographer was never available at the moment, so I was forced to take up a camera. But now I do more documentary work and work in film in particular for what it offers me. More for a story.
I'm Brian Kossoff. I started out as an advertising still life photographer in New York City for 25 years. 2002, I closed my photo studio and put the focus of my work on landscape and my more personal work. I predominantly shoot black and white film, and I'm aspiring to be Stephen's hairstylist. It's an opening. Yeah.
Just blow.
I want the challenge.
My name is Billy, another one from Singapore. I used to be an art director working in the advertising firm, and then turned myself a photographer. I studied in Brooks before as fine art photographer, but now I turn my careers to more focus on fine art photography, and always telling people that I colorblind because I only do black and white.
I'm Don Ross. I'm from Brandon, Vermont, and I've been involved in the pursuit of photographic art since 1970. I want to thank Steve for coming up with the concept for this show. Everything is still relates, I relate to that concept very strongly because I feel that my work has been a meditation on stillness. That's been the predominant theme that I have pursued in my work. So it's a perfect match. One thing that I would like to say is that working with film again, of course, like most people, I have gone digital, and that's been for the last almost 20 years. But working with film again really put me in touch with how much more contemplative the process becomes when you're working with film. And that is something that I'd completely forgotten about, even though the theme of stillness continued in my work. So thank you, Steve.
So, an oft-cited statistic is that every 2 minutes we now take more photographs than the entire history of photography combined. Most of those photographs are, of course, digital. So my first question for the panel today is, in a world saturated with digital imagery, why do you choose to shoot film today? Steve, why don't you open it up?
Well, sure, you know, I love film. I love dimensional quality of film. I love the history of cameras that I get to work with film. There's an awful lot of photographic equipment that fits sort of the vision of what I want to work to look like that will never have a digital component to. And I just love the organic nature, the way of working. It's very meditative. It just fits sort of my style. When I worked in the large format darkroom up until, say, 2002, 2003, I always thought that I would die in the darkroom. That was like my goal, was to die with the print tongs in my hand making a black and white print. And then when I started working in digital printing, I switched to digital briefly there, but I was still doing film, and I immediately went, no, this isn't for me. And so I've always done this sort of hybrid process. And I feel that we live in this golden time right now when the best films ever produced are available today. And the scanning technology is as good as it's going to get. The printing technology is great. So why not take advantage of everything that's possible?
Great.
My own perspective is I'm committed to the final image. Having started in advertising photography, clients don't care how you get to that final image. They just care that you get there. And I've kind of carried that over into my own work. I will use whatever tool, technique, process, whatever, which will result in the image that I want. And for me, when it comes to black and white, which is the majority of my work, I mean, digital black and white is very good, and it looks digital. It doesn't have this incredible smooth gradation of tone the way film does. Black and white film is still, in my perspective, the superior route to a high quality black and white print.
I would have to agree with that. I've
I'm glad you do.
I've tried desperately, maybe out of laziness, to achieve the same quality in a black and white print from a digital file that I used to do with large format negatives, and I can't do it. I'm not saying someone else can't, but there's just that quality that film brings to a print is really amazing. And we do live, as Eve mentioned, we live in a world of a bazillion images a day.
Most of those are Steve's.
Right. And they're test images of Eve.
Exactly. But how few of those images actually reach the stage of being printed? And that's what all of us here are involved in. We're all involved in printmaking at some level. That's how we get our work out there. It's not just something that fits on a screen on a laptop or an iPhone. It's something that has to be presented in a print form. So that's a whole other consideration.
It's also, they're not disposable.
Right.
I mean, digital images, I mean, you know, I know photographers who say, oh yeah, I shot 3,000 images last week. 3,000 images? That's like a couple of years worth of output for most film photographers, if not a decade's worth.
Right.
And then what do you do with it? I mean,
How do you edit that?
it's
You just walk away from it.
Yeah.
It's like,
Well, that's one of the things that I think is so interesting is that a lot of the people that study with me and people that I talk with, you know, they'll go off on these, you know, photo adventures, and maybe they're at first shooting digital, and they'll come home, and we're looking at just all of this work. And how do you possibly pick the best? When you've got the same scene, and your camera was on burst digital, and you shot, you know, 75 versions of it. It doesn't make sense. You know, I like Eggleston's approach that you shoot one negative of a scene, and you move on, and
So
that's
some of it is a quality issue, as you started
Yes.
talking about, and another is a process.
it's a
editing.
workflow. Yeah, it's a workflow.
I have to ask, how many people on this panel have encountered folks who, when they learn you're a photographer and that you shoot film, say, oh, they still make film? How many?
It's less common these days. I think
Yes.
we've had a bit
People
of
are starting to understand.
It's kind of like vinyl.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
it's come back and people see kids carrying around camera. I think people still ask the question. But I
Yes.
think a lot of people have already asked it and been told,
Yeah.
oh yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Well, there's been such a tremendous resurgence in
Yeah.
film the last. I mean, when I first started really advocating the advancement of film, which was about 2004, when I started writing a website called Visual Revolution, and 2004, 2005, I saw all these transitions in the industry. And there were a few years there during like 2008, 2009, when, you know, product was being discontinued and digital was on the full push to push film out the door, you know, but it's come back. And that's why the whole back from the dead. For high-end pro shooters, you know, I don't think film ever really left their working environment, but for the average shooter, it did. Yet I think you can see in the film sales from all the different manufacturers, from the products that Kodak and Fuji are bringing back, that the interest is there and the resurgence is real.
Yeah. And I think today, I mean, originally when film came into its being before digital got good enough to actually make an image, people didn't really question like, oh, why do you shoot film? No, you shoot film because if you want to photograph, that's what you use. It's transitioned that digital is the primary medium for taking pictures, which isn't a bad thing, but it doesn't mean that film has to go away.
Right.
Film becomes a creative choice.
Yeah.
Is it superior for some people's work, for some applications? And that's why it needs to stick around.
Yeah.
Well, it's just another tool.
Yeah, it's just
I
another
mean, digital in some areas can be really, I mean, I used to do, when I was an advertising photographer, I used to do a lot of special effects. And they were really complicated. There'd be like 6 cameras set up side by side, each aiming at a different component. And you had to tape your film into the film holder and expose it in each camera and pray that nothing moved even a millimeter, because otherwise you're starting from scratch all over again.
Yeah.
Digital was a godsend for special effects, but the stuff still looked kind of digital.
Yeah.
What do you mean when you say it looked digital?
Well, back then especially, I mean, you're looking at 20 megapixel digital back compared to 4x5 film. There's no comparison.
So like, I've heard Steve describe it as crunchy.
Yes.
You know,
Crunchy and sort of
boxy.
yeah, and not, if you look okay on the screen, but that's one of the things that I think Don was saying too is important, that the way that we relate with images nowadays, in a lot of cases, is on our phone, is on a computer screen. But the reality is we all make prints. And there's a very big difference when you've got a print on the wall and you feel the presence. I can always tell if it's a film or a digital file. There's a different depth.
Yeah, I think digital to me is more like a tools, because in the modern city, the clients were asking things that after shooting, I want to see the image immediately.
Right.
So to me, more like it's just a commercial tools.
Yeah.
I remember like back to 1992, I totally dropped photography works because they started digital at the time for 10 years. I went back to LA to turn myself as architect. Never touched the camera for 10 years because I realized it would take probably more than 8 years to stabilize for digital camera.
Right.
And I don't have the types of fortunate enough to catch up every year to changing camera back, whatever it is, and doesn't work that way. And besides, people always ask me how he describes analog photography works, film works, and digital. I always show them one movement, which is what we did, our camera, we just wind it, shoot, forget it, everything done. Because I think we know the image before we shoot.
Yeah.
Everything already in my mind.
Yeah.
But digital photographers, what they do, what they shoot, either they shoot it this way or they viewfinder. Second, they turn down.
Yeah.
Look at the image, meaning that they are not sure. Because they're given the chance to shoot a second time, that is why they end up 3,000 over shots.
Right.
Yeah.
But we can't do that. We can't afford to do that. I mean, it's crazy.
You
There's
know,
no time to contemplate the image.
I
That's
think
right.
the
Yeah.
contemplation
I'll take
for
the same
me,
picture a couple times,
yeah.
but I won't be like immediately reviewing it where instead of taking a couple times, I'm gonna take it 50 times.
Right.
And then I'm so insecure and unsure of which one's right that I don't ever really explore. I fixate on the image on the screen.
The contemplative part for me is, because most of you are photographers and I'm word and image and I'm looking to write from it. So when I'm in the field and I'm doing documentary work, I don't really know what I'm going for. So then when I, especially film, because of the tonality, the range, and the grain, I use the image as a muse for me. And then I look at it and before I write, I try to remember, my senses at the time.
It's a spring
How
word.
hot was it?
Yeah.
What was the
Yeah.
sound like? I don't know what I've captured, and actually I'm not trying to capture someone or something in particular. I'm trying for it to speak to me, and it's still nonfiction writing, but it's creative.
But the films it forces you to be more deliberative,
Yeah.
pre-exposure.
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
when you press that shutter on a piece of film, you've actually just spent money.
Yeah.
You've actually just, no, I mean, you have done. You
That
literally-
is expensive.
Yeah, and you've made a commitment, because here's now a physical object
Yes.
that you're going to have to hold on to or agonize
Decide
over
not
throwing
to.
it out.
Yes.
Whereas with digital, I mean, you know, you could do 5 million photographs. Oh, I'm just going to format I don't like any of them. And you just delete the entire thing.
Right, so the commitment is
So
different.
it tends to be, I think in film photography, you pre-edit. And in digital photography, you sort of post-edit.
Yeah.
I've also found that with all of my students that I always say that the best digital photographers in my mind are the ones that started with film,
Yeah.
the ones who work in film.
Why is that?
You have a different sense of work. You have a different workflow. You don't just shoot as fast as Brian was
Yeah.
saying. I think the same thing is true for printing. I mean, I think the best black and white digital printers were great black and white darkroom printers
Yeah.
because you've trained yourself to know what a good image is, and that takes time. And the process of the analog is a little slower, it's a little more contemplative, and yet at the same time, it's one that I think allows you to straddle both worlds in a better way.
Yeah, I think that's very important because most of the time I don't web print up to big size because I'm using the 8x10 largest. But now when I'm doing scanning and printing, where you see the image in the computer in front of the screen, you don't do like trying to add funny thing, but you're back to what Steve said.
Yeah.
The background of the basics that you have learned in the darkroom, you apply the same
The
thing.
fundamentals.
You don't do magic on it.
Yeah.
You don't add anything on it.
It's still dodging and burning in and
It's
contrast
basic.
control. That hasn't changed.
Yeah.
That hasn't changed.
Dodge,
So
burn,
the
contrast.
theme of everything is artists who are working in motion picture film. What is it that brought you to work in motion picture film specifically?
I would like to. This to me is something of magic. When Steve invited me to do this, I said, "Wow, this is something very interesting." But honestly, I failed for the first 2 months I was using the film because I had a filter doing different type of processing, and it doesn't work. When I'm after processing, I look at the acting. Oh my God, I see nothing. I totally see nothing. So I always say every day I'm learning, but now I fall in love with this film because the grain is not just dots.
Yeah.
It's a very nice
Yeah.
pattern on it.
Yeah.
When you enlarge and you're doing the dodging and retouching the dots, whatever it is, you see more thing. You find out more detail and the depths and the negative. It's amazing. Thank you, Steve, to introduce this to me.
I think, you know,
Let me just say one
Yeah,
thing.
go ahead, yeah.
I think this might be true of all of us here, is that Steve likes to spend our money. So he will say, oh, you got to try this film. Buy 10 rolls. It's only $13 a roll or whatever.
Yeah.
And then you got to buy a special developer for it, but you'll love it. And you're like, oh my God, okay, Steve, whatever you say, sir.
Yeah, because for this round, it's a simple, we can't get this negative. I get my friend Season to get it for me from Japan. One single roll that cost me $20. It's crazy. Oh.
yeah. Well, I remember, it's funny because years ago, before Eastman Kodak's bankruptcy, I was invited when they were retiring Kodachrome to have a white light tour of the building where they manufacture all the film. And Scott DiSabato at the time was the head of all film North America. And we were talking about Vision 3 motion picture film. And there were photographers at that time, just like there has been since the inception of photography, in 35 millimeter in particular, using motion picture film and processing in ECN2 or doing the double X black and white films. That's always happened. But I remember having the conversation with Scott saying, the vast amount of research and development in film technology goes into motion picture film because they make the most amount of money as a company selling motion picture film. And I was raising my hand to Scott going, so why don't we just sell motion picture film to everybody? And there was an answer, but I remember going, no, that doesn't answer my question. Everybody should be shooting this material. And that's when I started looking at different black and white motion picture films that were on the market, because that's primarily what I shoot as well. And I'm glad that I'm spending money, Brian.
So my company actually works specifically in this market, and the way that my company started was I started shooting motion picture film. And there are some differences, there's some technical differences. Motion picture has the most advanced low-tech technology out there in the world. It's the most advanced analog technology available. And it's amazing things that they produced. But it was very difficult to use because you needed special chemicals, it was hard to get. Also, motion picture film isn't consumer-based, so it expires much more quickly. It's when you take the image, you need to process it more quickly. And so, working in Hollywood, where I'm based out of, I was able to go straight to a motion picture lab and be able to get my short ends processed. But it wasn't accessible to most people in the world, so we wanted to make color motion picture film available for everybody. Long story short, it was a huge success. People absolutely love it. And people are producing kinds of work that I would never imagine possible to create on the films that we produce. Things that you wouldn't do in motion are being done still on this material that is so unique. It's advanced, it's a bit fickle in certain ways, it's different than what you would come to expect from a still photography film. And I think that's the coolest part is, like Stephen was saying a second ago, the best films ever in existence are available today. We've had a lot discontinued over the years. Agfa's gone, Fuji has a very limited catalog, but there's a lot of other more nuanced films popping up. And Kodak's banging it out. They're making a ton of film right now. They've been on a growth curve for the past 4 to 5 years now on film. And so it's interesting to see how the market has changed it from a consumer brand, something that was only for the most elite DPs, producers, directors, or something that just goes in the junk drawer, to now it's a very finely tuned artist tool.
Yeah.
And people don't want to just go grab, oh, green, yellow, whatever color the packaging is, I just need to take a picture. Now people are a lot more discerning of what they want out of their images, and they're willing to explore and try new films. Yeah. And it's fun to be on that side, because I'm originally a photographer. I'm a consumer of these materials. But being somebody who's supplying it for other people and seeing all the amazing work that's being produced on it is so enriching. It's awesome.
Well, I also like, especially on films like Double Lens, which is the black and white film. It was released in 1959. I mean, everything from Schindler's List and Raging Bull, parts of Casino Royale were shot on that film. And the emulsion has changed very, very little since 1959. So when I pull out my 1956 Leica M3 and I'm putting in this film technology and the look and the grain and the silver content that goes back to the 50s, I like the look and the feel. It's different than modern films. And I'm not saying it's better, it's a conscious choice to use that material because I like the way it looks. It reflects sort of my visual aesthetics.
But even with the cameras themselves, there's a whole different physical aesthetic working with an older camera than scrolling through digital menus.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is that there was a time when you'd say go on eBay and you see Hasselblads and Rolleiflexes for ridiculously low prices. They were just, this is maybe about 10 years ago. People, professionals were just dumping their stuff, they were going digital, and you could pick up that equipment for a song. And now, all of that stuff has gotten really pricey again. I mean, you're like buying brand new versions of that camera in terms of the cost factor. And it's not because they're so rare, because these cameras are still out in plenty supply. It's that they're so in demand.
Yeah. Yeah.
People want to shoot film through a Hasselblad.
Yeah.
I also think, because somebody mentioned this too, about shooting film takes longer. You have to study and it slows you down, so it makes you in the moment. And I've had experiences in the field where I was, not allowed to photograph nor record the interview. So I remember sitting in the room thinking, just like this, okay, there's red walls, there's lighting, and that person is laughing. And I had to try to remember it so that I could write about it. But had I had a digital camera or a video camera, I wouldn't even have been in that moment. I would have just let the camera and the digital do it, and I would have looked at it later, but I wouldn't have felt it in the moment.
I just wanted to ask you, so your company is CineStill, and when did you begin producing film? When did CineStill start?
The first film that we released was in 2013, before CineStill even had a name, basically. Because we were originally doing it for ourselves.
And you did a Kickstarter
It was
campaign?
before this.
Okay.
We did do it on a Kickstarter campaign that was to make medium format film, which is a film that motion picture film has never been in. Trying to make it in that format was very difficult, and we wanted to make it something the community could be a part of rather than just a bank, you know? But before that, when we first started doing it, we were already me and my brother were already shooting motion picture film in 35 format, but you had to go to a motion picture lab to get it processed, and we had to shoot it in this massive Nikon F3 with a 250 exposure back, because they wouldn't process in anything shorter than 33 feet long film with no cuts in it. So I'm carrying around this 15-pound camera just to take 35mm photos.
And how did you start doing that? Where did that come from?
Well, we were working in LA, me and my brother. We were shooting all film weddings and a lot of music stuff, especially live music. And so with both of those, you have a lot of situations where the light is really low. And it's very tungsten bounce, so very yellow. So if you shoot, and we weren't really into digital. We love black and white photography, but we also love color. And in those really low tungsten light situations, there isn't a daylight, or there isn't a still photography film that can handle it. It comes out, everything comes, you can't just turn the dial on your camera to light bulb, and then you get good colors. And so, but in motion, that most popular motion stock out there is tungsten balance. It's balanced for that yellow light. So if someone's wearing a shirt with a blue logo on it, it doesn't just come out black. You get all the cool tones as well, instead of predominantly yellow. So we were actually doing it specifically because we were shooting some Super 8 and 16 for music videos and some wedding documentary stuff. And we were seeing the difference between digital images.
You said, I want to use this over here.
Because we tried digital too. It didn't stick for us, which is fine. But we were like, no, we want to stick with the all film workflow. And the only way we could get those good color images, and we didn't really like using flash. We didn't like overlighting stuff and becoming too imposing on the scene that we were photographing. But we wanted to shoot those like candlelit dinners,
right?
You know, in the reception or backstage photography.
So it's a
without,
feeling you couldn't get otherwise.
Exactly.
Effect.
Yeah. So that's why we became interested in motion picture film stocks, because they just performed so well. Then we had to figure out how to make those stocks compatible so I could actually just shoot it in my Leica and carry around a nice, because the whole idea of being unobtrusive, and you had a camera this big, it was kind of it was great. We got a ton of great images, but it was very difficult and exhausting. But we had to figure out a way to chemically change the film so you didn't have to take it to a motion picture lab. So you could take it to a standard 1 hour, professional photo lab, or process it at home.
Right.
And once we did that, we were like, okay, it's a long story how that happened. Like, we destroyed thousands, 10,000 feet of film because I'm not an engineer. I have an engineer's mind to some extent, and I do a lot of research on my own, but I'm not formally trained. So a lot of our experimentation and inventing things tends to be destruction. That doesn't work. Okay, next. And we're just checking off the list.
Thomas Edison in the light bulb.
Exactly. It's to find the right answer.
Yeah.
And it was a long process, but by the time we got done with it, we're like, cool, now I can put it in my Leica. But I also have enough film to make it, because you have to do it in a larger volume.
Sure.
I could shoot this for the next 2 years, and by then, look, it's all expired.
Uh-huh.
And I'm like, okay, let's send some to some friends. Let's see how they like it. Do you think maybe this could be a market? Like people, I think I love it, so maybe other people do. Sent it to a bunch of friends. There was a film show, like an online video thing with film photographers shooting film. What's it called? I think it's just called Film.
Yeah.
The film show. And it was really popular at the time, and they had us come on and have their hosts and a bunch of people shoot it, and it just took off. And now I do as much shooting as I can, which is hardly anything because I'm making the material.
Wow.
But it's really fun. There's another satisfaction that comes from being able to, like you, being a master printer. Like, even though it's not your work, being able to work with artists and see what they're creating and try to help them capture their vision.
Facilitate that
Yeah, it's really great.
process. Yeah. Well, I have a third and final question for our panel, which is our perception of photography and its veracity, its value, its uses. It's changed radically in the last 50 years. So where would you like to see our medium go in the future?
And silence.
That's the one.
Well, I mean, I hope that film is still around, and in fact, even improved upon from where it's at. I hope digital gets better as well, because it's just more tools. I don't think you need to have the choice of only one or the other, because they're still so different. Even if the end result at some point becomes identical, just because the process is different, some people may prefer it. The contemplative aspect of film, although you can still be contemplative and shoot digital, but it all depends, I think, on what you started with.
I think our medium is separating in a lot of ways. Video is becoming so dominant, and especially like in news media. I think we're sort of in the dark ages in a lot of ways of journalism, because journalism's hands are tied so much. I mean, could Eugene Smith make his artwork today? No, wouldn't be allowed. I think I think we're going to be better in the long run, but I think that video is going to take up a large share of what we see in the news.
Yeah.
I think that film photographers, by and large, are going to be, obviously right now it's a very conscious artistic choice as to why you want it. I think the disposable nature of digital technology is not going anywhere, though I do think our relationship to those images and social media is changing. The one positive thing I will say that has happened is that people don't believe images anymore. And that's good. I have no problem with that.
I think that I see like that divergence, that separation, definitely happening. I think today we're in a film renaissance. It's coming back and it's being explored in a whole new way. People are back in the old school days when I was learning film. You didn't want light leaks, right? No. You didn't want an image that was out of focus. Now it's okay to want that.
Yeah.
Now it's okay to embrace the things that film brings to the image, and I see that happening. It's really good and encouraging. And then on the flip side, with digital, like you were saying with video, it's more and more people, if you bring a digital camera on a shoot, they're going to ask you, do some video. And that leads to the next step, where why hire a photographer? Just hire a film crew, do the video, pull the stills.
4K, be done.
And not that that's going to take over, but it is becoming more and more synonymous. If you're a photographer, you should be a videographer.
Yep.
If you're a videographer, we can pull stills from that. Where if you want to be a disciplined, whether you're doing fine art or personal work or commercial, if you want to be a disciplined photographer, film is a great frontier to explore that right now. It's the oldest technology in photography, but it's also, to me, the most interesting and most changing. Which I like, that's why I like the term renaissance.
Yeah.
Like the digital revolution happened, it was painful.
Yeah.
It took a lot of casualties.
Yes, we did.
But now we're in a renaissance, and it's really interesting.
No, I agree.
I used to work in an area where I'm on the second floor, second story, and on the first story are all the wedding studios. And from the top, you can see all the thumbnails of all the wedding albums. They all look the same.
Yeah.
Yes.
So right now, there are people who are actually looking for photographers that shoot on film, so that it will be unique. Like my wedding is different than yours.
Yeah.
Because all over the country, everything looks the same. You have Taiwanese photographers. They are all templates, and I mean, it's quite. Some of them are really quite ugly and tacky. And also looking at the bigger picture from a more mainstream and layman term, I feel that this medium is a very good entry point to introduce art to people who might not be familiar with it. A lot of people associate art with like, oh, it's not part of my life, it's art, it's not, I'm a scientist. But photography itself is the one that kickstarted the Industrial Revolution. It started out as science, it became art, and then it just interweaves. And through conversations, you actually, a lot of people don't realize that, a video is actually made up of many, many stills. So everything is still.
Everything is still.
So it really is going one whole big round to that it was from, and people don't realize that. And when you explain it to people using photography, which everyone takes for granted because they have a smartphone, it really clicks something in them like, photography is not just an image, it's not just recording and recording. There's more to it in terms of history, technology, visual aesthetics, philosophy. I mean, if they just take a bit of time to study the history of photography, it's what changed the society to what it is today. And I really feel that it's a great entry point. It's something that everybody can have access to. You can have a scanned image and look quite similar, but you can take a picture of the Mona Lisa and it looks very different on the screen. So I'm not saying that we are using photography to create a mass mainstream to sell out, but it's a great entry point. I feel it's something that people can relate to and understand, and it will bring people into the art way of thinking.
Yes.
For lack of a better explanation. Yeah, I think that's great.
I think digital, that's the one thing that digital has done.
Yes.
It's made more people have access and interest in photography. Some people stop there and they're like, cool, I could take a picture of the grocery list or whatever on my phone. Or other people, they pull their phone out and all of a sudden they start exploring with their iPhone or Android camera or whatever, and it inspires them and they're like, hold on a second, this is cool, but it feels so disposable.
Yeah.
It feels so unintentional, but now, like no matter where you come from, zero formal training in art, if they can transition and film can be presented to them,
Yeah.
it creates an opportunity for them to go, oh, like what made me love photography was the ability to capture a fleeting moment, something impermanent, and make it permanent. And that's why when I switched to digital, never bought a camera, actually just borrowed it from friends, tried a bunch of cameras. By the time I got done with the cycle, I was like, this just doesn't have the same satisfaction. And that comes back to the process and whether or not you enjoy doing what you're doing.
Right.
It's a very different process, there's no doubt. And I think it's a process that allows, or it can allow, more reflection on the work. It's a different way of editing, looking at contact sheets, as opposed to trying to scroll through images on a screen. It's just different. And I know for me, and I think for most people up here, it's one that I think we all find rewarding, but not exclusive necessarily.
I was wondering, Steve, if you wanted just to go back to touching on the point that Raymond was saying about everything is still, do you want to maybe just talk a little bit about the underlying of that thought process for you, how you came to the title, Everything is Still?
Sure. Well, in motion picture, I'll go back to a little bit of history really quickly. In 1887, George Eastman purchased the patent for the flexible film format. And Edison was a friend of Eastman, and in 1888, they got together and decided that they would take the Eastman film, cut it in half, put perforations on the side, the standard 35 millimeter perforations, which are actually called Edison perforations. Yeah. And that was the birth of motion picture film. And what's very interesting is the very first 35 millimeter camera came out in about 1911, but the first production one was about 1914. The first Leica came out in 1922, 1923. It wasn't until 1934 that you could buy 35 millimeter film preloaded in a cassette. So between 1911 and 1934, if you wanted to shoot 35 millimeter film, you bought 35 millimeter motion picture film and cut it down in the darkroom for yourself. So there's always been this relationship back and forth between still and digital. And I was thinking about the idea that there really is no such thing as a motion picture image. It's a sequence of still images, whether they're projected at 5, 10, 12, 24 frames per second or high frame rate. It's still just a sequence of still images. And at the same time, in still photography, everything we do is an expression of time as well. Whether it's a 30th of a second or a 15th of a second, it's all about an expression of time between the two. And I think that there's more that connects cinematographers and still photographers, and especially nowadays, and more so than ever. We're using so many, the factory that makes your film and then makes all still film at Eastman Kodak, also makes the motion picture film.
Yeah.
They're on the same line, same machines. We're all sort of in the same boat together.
But there's also, I mean, you could look at photographers that do sequential photography. Like Dwayne Michaels would do a story. And then the story might actually take place over 5 or 10 minutes or whatever, but there'd be, say, 5 frozen moments from it. So he kind of created a movie and eliminated all the intermediary frames.
Right.
Force you to look at just a split moment before moving on to the next
Of course, then he writes on it, like somebody else I know.
Yeah.
How she did it.
And kind of fills in what you've missed on those frames.
Yeah.
Well, this is the thing that even I,
It's like a
I
film
need the
deconstruction.
overlapping
Yeah.
frames and the writing,
Yeah.
same sort of thing. Yeah.
And,
Comic books.
Yeah.
So maybe we could take a moment, if anybody has any questions they'd like to ask the panel.
Yes, this is my real life.
Yes?
I had 2 Pentax K1000s and they both died. So my daughter-in-law got me a little digital and then they got me the big one when that died. But I really miss my manual control.
Yeah. Yeah.
So much more creativity with it.
There's more that you can do. You're not locked in so much to what the camera manufacturers, what the color spaces. The thing about digital is that once you start scratching the surface on it, Brian and I were talking about this morning over coffee. It's about the 10th cup. And we were discussing that, in the early days of digital photography, it was very much like the Wild West. No one shared their secrets. Everybody had their proprietary workflows. And to get a camera back to work with your computer and everything to be calibrated was really difficult. And what the digital industry has done is they've tightened everything up to where the workflow doesn't have the degree of creative flexibility that it had back then. And that's one of the things that I like about the manual control of film cameras, the scanning processes. As a creative person, I have more options.
I have a question back for you. When you were shooting the Pentax film cameras, how many images did you print of that? And now that you're shooting digital, how many images of that do you print?
I rarely print them and usually I'm sending them on to an artist or somebody. So what they're going to do with them, or a musician. I don't usually print any, because I've got so many, but I printed a lot way back.
When you were doing film?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when you shot film, you actually ended up with a tangible, a print or a contact sheet of some sort.
Well, I did them in the darkroom.
Yeah. And there's a physical nature to that. There's something nice about being able to show, but whether it's as a professional person or just as a family, to be able, Eve has been working on our family's albums forever. And it's nice that up to a certain period, we have all these wonderful photographs and all these albums that you can sit down with and look at with your family. And then there's this period where you all have to pull out the iPad, and it's not the same experience. It's a completely different shareable experience.
I used to work in professional photography in the 90s when it was all dying because the digital was coming. And again, I had a Pentax K1000 that I loved. But the thing that I thought was so great is, and do you feel like with digital, is you would go out with your analog little camera and you would wait. And you knew when you got that shot. Like you knew, but you couldn't see it. And then you had to like take it back and go in the dark and then hope you didn't screw it up. And then there it was. And that's what I miss with digital, because with digital it's like, and yeah, it's a great shot, but I'm never going to print it and I'm never going to show it to anybody. You know? Whereas with the, you would take your sheets with you to show everybody, and everybody get their pen out, do now. And then you get in the dark room and you dodge and you burn, and you're like, oh, I didn't even know I was there. I don't get that with digital anymore.
There's a common,
There's no drama left.
there's a common meme I see on Facebook, and it shows a roll of 120 film, it shows a roll of 35 millimeter film, and then it shows like an SD card. And the 120 says 12 exposures, 6 are good. The 35 millimeter says 36 exposures, 6 are good. And then for the SD card, it says 2,000 exposures, 6 are good.
Yeah, but you're never going to print this.
That's right.
And if you want to look at them, you've got to sit in front of the screen.
It's a whole different
And
editing
again,
process.
it's not the book, So yeah, you can send it to like Shutterfly and get a picture It's not, you know, the pictures don't fall at the bottom, every head goes on. It's just, it's not the same.
I also think the editing of the contact sheet is a wonderful book, Magnet's contact sheets. And Magnum requires that all the photographers make contacts, and the contact sheets are all shared at the different agencies. And it's one thing to have an artist come in or a photographer, and someone maybe I'm working with, and I'm looking at the 10 images that they've selected. It's another thing to say, show me the contact sheets of the last 10 rolls of film, and you can really get into the way someone thinks and the way they're working through a scene, and you can go, does this person actually work the scene, or are they relying upon serendipity and hoping that they get the shot? And you really learn someone's thought process. I recommend to everybody that I speak to that shoots film, I say, make contact sheets, make contact sheets, make contact sheets. It's the best way to edit.
The third question you asked this panel was about the future, okay? No one on this panel is under 20 years old, right?
It's
I don't
under
think so.
20? I don't think so.
I have a thyroid issue. I'm actually
Not in your imagination, in your bodies. Okay. But if there were 3 people sitting here who were under 20, maybe even from Burn High School right here, who studied photography, well, let's take photography students out of it. But our children and our grandchildren are growing up in a world where they've only known digital photography. How do you think they'd respond to the same things you just said? And what would be the same and what would be different?
I can respond to that actually, because I just taught a course at Burton on film photography. And Burton, for their motion picture school that they do, I mean, you have the Golic Awards, I taught them how to make a hand crank motion picture that actually won the award for the best in the series. They made a silent movie. And in the course of 5 classes, I taught them the history of photography, how to compose with this really limited camera that we had, how to process the film, scan the film, and put it together. And they wanted more. And I know we can speak to this too, that the #1 demographic of people getting into film are between the ages of 18 and 35. And I think the reason for that is that they grew up on digital, and this is alternative. It's different. They see something that they really want in that. It is the #1 growth market, though, I know, is the younger people. It's not, the older people, we've been shooting film, we're gonna keep shooting film, but the younger crowd is the one that I'm so encouraged. And teaching the kids there, they were just like, and now we're talking about doing it next year. They're so excited about the idea of having film photography again at the school.
But you're addressing the question not the way I asked. What I was asking was those generational people who are not in photography, who take a digital phone and its camera and its video and Instagram and all the technology associated with it for granted as part of their life. And I'm 72 years old, and I started with a developing tank in a dark room, and I shot a film and I took it in and I had to wait and see, and then the magic appeared. And it was like digital at 1 year exposure time.
Well,
I wonder where, as art, sure, film is a medium. There's a group in the Decent Outdoor France called the Alternative Process Workshop in Decent Santa Fe, and they alternate, and they added film to that. Their armamentarium in 2003, because that was when digital went over the press. But people everything there was using some form of old technology. I mean, you keep saying film. Glass plates, tablets, paper. The technology is progressing to the point where we destroy our atmosphere. You're not going to have electricity for a digital camera. You're not going to have chemicals to develop film. The only thing you're going to be able to do is dust paper like Talbot did, and hope you can find some hypo somewhere.
When we did the I Choose Film show here a couple of years ago that I curated, we brought the Penumbra Foundation up from New York City and doing web plate collodion. And a lot of friends that I have do a lot of different alternative processes. And to me, it's just the analog. And as I said, we live in this amazing time when everything is still available. In the future, who knows? But right now, you can do Talbot, you can do albumin, you can do silver. And as an artist, I think that's great, and I think there is a big interest. with the younger people. I mean, it's funny, one of the things that a lot of the younger people are doing now with their iPhones is Fuji makes the Instax iPhone printer where they'll take a picture with their phone and then through Bluetooth print it out on the Instax Polaroid type material. But for them, that to me is like,
for my granddaughter.
yeah, that's them dipping their toes in, and they're going. I'll never forget. It was about 10 years ago. Our daughters had a lemonade stand, and J.K. Adams for some
It was like Kids Day.
Yeah, and I had a Polaroid camera with me at that time, and I realized that none of the kids there had ever seen an instant image, and I took a picture, and they were just like, oh my God, they couldn't believe it. And then one of my students at the time was doing a lot of work in Afghanistan, and he took one of the Instax, one of the very first mini ones with him. And he'd be off in these remote villages taking a photo, and it was like, the moon landing. People were like, oh my God, seeing this image come up. There's something engaging about that. And he can give it to them. And that was
the inverse of that is true, because I photograph in Nicaragua a lot, and I use X-Pan with black and white film, and all the kids come running up and they want to see the digital image on the back.
Exactly. I've had that same thing, and I'm going, no, you gotta wait.
I was actually going to comment on that exact thing. I actually think a lot about this because I'm 35. I'm at the end of the biggest growth section within film photography. And I remember it wasn't that long ago that I think I was the young people. And now I feel like I am just a little bit out of touch with like what their motivations are. So I ask that question a lot. We have a couple people in business in their early 20s, so I have a pretty good connection with that. Under 18, it's a little bit more difficult, but all I know is I see more and more excitement in analog processes in general. Like you were saying, I used to shoot weddings, and I remember taking pictures of like little toddlers like that were like flower girls, and they'd come up and grab my camera to look at the back, but I was shooting film. Because to them, it's not that magical. They expect it to be right there. Whereas I remember the first time I had a camera, it's a little HP, like I think 1.2 megapixel digital camera, first digital camera my family owned. And I was fascinated with the fact that I could see it right away. Now, they're not, but a physical print, that fascinates them.
Yeah.
So what made all of us so fascinated with the digital image and how quickly it could be produced and reviewed is actually it's inverse. That's ubiquitous now. Like it's like, cool, a digital picture. You took a picture on your phone and shared it on Instagram. Wow.
Yeah.
But if you can take an actual, like Polaroids are the big, like I love Polaroid for getting people into shooting film.
Yeah.
It's so good for that Polaroid, Fuji, whatever.
Yeah.
But like those instant images that are one of a kind, it's the extreme. And
Well, I think the Instax is an interesting example.
Yeah.
Fuji last quarter, Taylor Swift, of course, puts a song on one of the Instax cameras. They sold 6.3 million units in one quarter. They sell more Instax film than they can possibly produce. China would buy them out if they could. In terms of the actual.
Because of Taylor Swift.
Because of Taylor Swift. It's all Taylor Swift related. But the Instax, once again, it's a stepping stone. They're seeing the instant. They also like the one of a kind. They like the physicalness of, of a single image. Speaking of that, coming up.
And the stealthiness of it, too.
The stealthiness. No one heard that. That was so
What you
silent.
just
But
did is what all professional photographers in the 40s in New York would do in their studio.
Totally.
Shoot a Polaroid, check it out, and
That's it.
love the film.
I still do it.
Digital cameras are just a new Polaroid.
Yeah.
You just take the digital and just look at it, and then you get your film out and you take your picture.
Yeah, you have your art director sign off and this, and you're good to go.
I did that for 25 years.
Yeah.
I would go through multiple cases
a Polaroid.
of 55 Polaroid every week. Besides the fact that my clients paid for it and there's a markup, which is wonderful, the whole process was one of criticism and seeking perfection. You shoot a Polaroid, and it's through the camera lens that you're using. It's exactly the same scene that's going to be on film. And you look at it, and what's wrong with this? You fix it, you shoot another Polaroid. And you keep doing that process until it's done. There's nothing left to fix. But you had talked earlier about, when there's no electricity and all the alternate processes that come out. I think part of the alternate processes are because, like, with film, with black and white sensitized photo paper, you need, facilities to create that stuff. I mean, right now I think one of the few companies making coated black and white silver gelatin paper is Ilford. And Ilford disappears. I don't know if anyone's left doing it. But if you work in platinum and palladium, if you're working in
Zeotypes.
yeah, all of these, all you gotta do is have paper.
Yep.
You're producing the sensitized material on there yourself at home at your own convenience. You're not reliant on some enormous facility to coat paper for you. So I added the ability to do platinum in my studio because I was afraid, my God, my darkroom is for nothing if Ilford stops making paper.
Ilford was bought out by a small Dutch group. They still make the films.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
but as long as it's profitable for them.
Yeah, and the good part right now is it's profitable enough that Ilford even opened a facility in the United States, in California. I mean, their sales, all the companies' film sales have been
It's good.
on a steady increase.
And I actually have a good relationship with Ilford. They're not going anywhere as long as they're turning profits, and that doesn't look like it's changing.
Yeah.
The Pemberley group, right? Yeah, they just want to make sure they're not losing money. It's an investment, but
And I
they're not
think-
trying to flip it.
I think your point is well taken, that this is a constantly evolving medium, and that's a good thing.
Yeah.
And that the more options that practitioners of photography have at their disposal, the better.
Yeah.
And I think that's a side point of this whole conversation is we want all the
Yeah, we're greedy.
options.
We want everything.
Right?
There's an underlying assumption here that's not being stated, and that is that 25 years ago, you'd be arguing about, is this art and does it belong over there? And this time, you're talking your art now, and you're talking about, well, am I going to use oil or pastels, or should I use chalk, or should I, tools to make my art.
Yeah.
And basically, I think what's happened is the digital wave was like, oh wow, look at this, and then like everything it wears out.
Yeah.
May I share something? Because I have a privilege of being under 30. So, so I started on film photography when I was about 17. So yeah, that's a demographic. One of my seniors gave me a Hoga camera, and I'm like, oh, I was fascinated by it. But I have a friend, I've known him since I was 17. Right until recently, I tried to convince him to use a film camera. He says no, but we live in a very exciting time now. I think really fits into exhibition. There's a recent pop culture. There's a movie called Pokemon. It's a Japanese cartoon shot in the US. So they shot it in Kodak film. So my friend, when I showed him the article, he was like, Raymond, I think I'm finally going to shoot using film. Raymond, do you have any cameras? Which camera do you suggest that I buy? So it's like, finally after 10 years, I didn't have to convince him because he saw something different in the Pokemon movie, even though there's a lot of CGI.
Yeah.
The base was shot on film. And you have like Christopher Nolan, shooting the Batman, the night scene. It looks different. It's the grain.
Yeah.
So I think it's a really exciting time because it's part of pop culture now. When I started out, it's like, oh, you shoot on film, you're a hipster. You're just trying to be a poser.
Yeah, I love being called a this is the 90s.
Even Cine Still has this notion to it. Even about 5 years ago, even about 2 years ago, if you say, oh, I have a Cine Still, it's like, oh, you have extra money to order it from the website. Yeah, and right now it's really different because there are more and more professionals using it, and they really push the limitations of the film, and people see that it's different. And yeah, I hope that looking in the future, I wasn't very hopeful, but these few years, as a younger person, I think there's a future to it. Starting from the Instats, the Polaroids,
Gateway.
movies, pop culture. Yeah.
Well, I also saw that, I was just in Ecuador, Quito, making work. And I did a lot of work with these feminist artist organizations down there, helping them document. And there were a lot of young women between the ages of like 15, 25. They're all shooting film. The only thing down there is anything that isn't made in Ecuador, the tariff is like 400%. You know, so a roll of film is like $35.
Wow.
You know, and that's not including the processing. But they're doing it. They're shooting film. They're being very meditative because each frame is very expensive. But I was surprised at how many young people, you know, they've got their iPhones, or they're not allowed iPhones as much, but they're digital phones, but they're all walking around with plastic cameras to film loaded in. And there's these pop-up darkness, attention to the picture, of just like, there's a lab in La Foresta, and it's the size of this room, and the guy's got a bottle of E6 chemistry that I think is 30 years old, some C41, a couple enlargers, and it's the largest photographic user lab in all of Quito. And all the young people are going in and they're sharing their information and they're learning how to make prints, and it's fascinating. I agree, I think a lot of this is pop culture. It's hit a point that it's hit a saturation point.
So it's a very exciting time.
Yes.
So I think on Pokemon, we will end.
Yes.